Hey everyone, welcome. Today we're going to talk all about your story's arc. I'm going to provide 5 simple questions that you can ask to dig in and see if your arc is working. So in this video, I'm going to share 5 questions that you can use to audit your story's narrative arc. And this will work whether you're working on fiction or a memoir. Simply said, an arc is the structure of your story. There are lots and lots of great resources about identifying the different points of the narrative arc, and there will actually be a video dropping here real soon about the same thing. So we'll save that for another day. But essentially, you can think about your story's arc as being the structure that keeps everything together and that moves your story forward. So what I'm going to talk about in this video are the 5 questions that you can ask to audit your arc and see if it's really giving your story the structure, the form, and that movement forward. So let me know in the comments if you can relate to this. So you may feel like you've been in revision mode forever. You are polishing every sentence. You have been looking at the anatomy of your scene. You've been thinking about character motivation. You've been thinking about authentic, sharp dialogue, but still something about the story isn't feeling right. It may be that you've heard it from a beta reader or it's your own gut instinct. You just feel like your story is flat. It's not taking people on the journey that you imagine them experiencing when they read your story. If you are hearing or feeling like your story is getting boring somewhere, something feels stuck, it's just not keeping audience attention, that is probably a structural issue. You could have the best characters in the world, you could have the best plot points in the world, but if they're not organized in a way that's strategic, you are going to get that feeling like your story is not building, turning, landing where it should. And so when we dig into a narrative arc audit, what we're really looking at is how to give your story more momentum, more movement. We are going to look at some of the questions at a very macro level, meaning at a structural level, not down close at a line editing level. We're going to be looking at some really structural, kind of fundamental questions that I ask myself as a developmental editor to evaluate whether or not your narrative arc is doing its job. So when we think about a strong arc that's really doing its job, it's doing some of the following. It's forcing change, it's building pressure, it's driven by your character. It's not driven by coincidence or happenstance. It's really that player is the character that is setting everything in motion. And it's headed toward an ending that feels earned. So the first question that you might ask when you're evaluating your arc is, does the inciting incident truly disrupt my protagonist's life? Often when we define inciting incident and we think about it in terms of our story, we're simply thinking of it as an event that happens. But that's not enough. What we really want that inciting incident to do is alter your protagonist's reality in a way that they cannot immediately come back from. A true inciting incident is profoundly disruptive, and the character can't just casually step away from it. It is going to impact them one way or another for the duration of the story. So when it comes time to evaluate your story's inciting incident, here are some features that you want to be looking for. Does that incident force a change? Does it create consequences? And does it alter your character's path? Let's look at an example of an inciting incident that almost gets there, but doesn't quite make it. A woman finds evidence that her father may have lied to her about the past. She is unsettled, but convinces herself nothing has changed. So if we just glance at this quickly, it's easy to see how a writer might feel, kind of okay about this inciting incident. There's been a lie. There's an unsettled feeling that comes because of it. There's our consequence. We start to get a little curious. What is this lie? But then, just as that interest is sort of ramping up and we're starting to get curious, the author has pulled back by letting the character convince herself nothing has changed. And so we sort of started to go up, things started to escalate, and then they were brought right back down. That de-escalation so prematurely means that this inciting incident is not quite doing its job. Let's look at a stronger alternative. A woman finds evidence that her father lied to her about the past, and the discovery threatens her inheritance, her relationships, and her sense of identity. She cannot unknow it, and she calls her mother to see what she knows. Now we have almost the same inciting incident. The difference is that in this case, she doesn't just put those feelings that she's having to the side. She doesn't push them to the side. She calls her mother. And by calling her mother, she is probably opening a whole can of worms. We don't know how mom's going to react, but I'm guessing there's going to be some kind of reaction that pushes that trajectory forward. And so the next scene is going to be different than the scene that just happened. And that is how we build that momentum, that interest, and we get our readers immediately immersed in what's about to unfold. Your second question involves the midpoint pivot. Does the midpoint shift the protagonist from reaction to action? So here's what we look for. Before your midpoint, your character is just kind of in survival mode. They are adapting to whatever pressures are being put on them, or they're avoiding them, or they're just, like I said, in survival mode, just trying to get through. It is not a sustainable situation. They've got to move forward. They've got to get unstuck. That's what your story is about. But when we first meet them, they are in this scenario where things are kind of happening to them. After midpoint, your character is going to begin to get some agency. They're going to begin making choices, plans, acting with intent. Not necessarily, this is not to say they are making good choices or good plans, but it means that they have been activated and they are doing something that is going to impact the way the story continues to progress. And really, that's where things start to get interesting, right? Because things are starting to pick up. We're starting to see how this character is navigating their life and what the consequences will be. So, for example, a character hides from the antagonist. They are reacting. They are in that reaction mode in the beginning of your story. But as time goes on, maybe that character makes a plan and moves toward confrontation. And now we're at that point where he is acting. We are seeing how his actions change what is going to happen. So our third question is, do your story's stakes deepen? As your story advances, your stakes need to get higher and higher because that is what's giving your character something to respond to. And when your character responds, they act in a way that is making your story change. It's moving them forward. It's what keeps that reader rooting for them. It's what keeps them turning the pages to see what's going to happen, to see if they're going to get out of that mess. So again, your job as an author is to throw as much hard stuff at your characters as you can possibly bear to do. So let me show you what that would look like. As your story advances, the cost of your characters' failures or difficulties are going to grow significantly. They're going to stack on top of each other in a way that raises those stakes scene by scene. The scope of loss is going to expand and emotional risk is going to deepen for your character. So here is one example of what that might look like. You have a character who, in the beginning of the story, is risking feeling some embarrassment, maybe some shame in her community. In the middle, she finally risks exposure. So, what is the outcome going to be? What is the consequence going to be? And in the end, she risks losing her identity or everything she's built. And you see how these stakes are getting higher and higher and higher. And there's more and more that's going to need to be navigated and ultimately resolved in order for the story to have a satisfying ending. But this kind of deepening and strengthening and raising of stakes is what keeps our story packed with interest and keeps the reader emotionally invested. So, if you want to do a revision checklist, you are looking for escalation that causes deeper consequences, not just bigger events. So, this doesn't need to be, I always want to emphasize this for those of you who are writing quieter stories. This doesn't mean that there's a bank robbery or a fire. The internal stakes raising can be primarily interior, if that is the nature of your story. Um, it just needs to escalate in a way that is meaningful to your character so that we feel we're right beside them in that feeling of loss and concern and those raising of stakes. So, question number 4, is the lowest point caused by your character, not coincidence? So, a strong low point comes from flawed choices, misjudgments, beliefs that no longer hold. In other words, something that comes from your character. Let me give you some examples. A plan that fails because of a random interference, like bad luck, is not going to be nearly as compelling as a plan that fails because a character trusted the wrong person or refused to change or made some other bad decision. Inserting your characters into the events that are escalating your story's stakes, raising the stakes, is how we connect with the story on a deeper level. It's how we really feel like we're in the shoes of the characters, feeling the consequences as they feel them too. So this is not a rule set in stone. Sometimes happenstance happens, and there could be a tornado, and that's out of your character's control. And we want to insert that in there as part of raising the stakes. But what's really interesting about that moment isn't so much that the tornado came, but rather how your character chose to navigate that scary situation and perhaps some really terrible repercussions at the end, right? So it's always about your character. It's less important what happens, it's more important how they are responding. So next we want to ask question number 5, has the protagonist changed internally by the end? And here are some things to look for. Has your character changed their beliefs, their assumptions, their emotional posture, and their ways of relating to others? Your story should be putting pressure on all of these things, and we should see that in your narrative arc. So if we take that tornado example again, it's not so much that the tornado has happened, but rather how your character is changed by the fact that they experienced that tornado. How did that change their beliefs, assumptions, emotional postures, and ways of relating to others? In the beginning of your story, it may be that your character believed they had to do everything on their own. And by the end, they may come to the conclusion, I can trust others and still be strong. And this comes about because of all of those plot points that have taken place, because of all the things that you're throwing at them. But it's not the plot points that drive the arc, it's your character's response to those plot points. So finally, you want to be thinking about your own story and asking these questions. Does your story force change? Does your protagonist gain agency at the right place? Do your stakes deepen? Does the low point come not from the plot points, but from your character's experience of them? And does your ending reflect some kind of earned internal shift that marks that they are different at the end than when they started in your story? If you are still feeling after you've done this audit and after you've worked on some of those matters, if you're still feeling like, this story is not landing right, there are still aspects of it that feel quite flat, here's a list of some questions that you can consider. First one is, where is the story not yet forcing change? So we've talked about some of those friction points. Look for those in your story and ramp them up if you can. Where is the character still too passive? Remember, at a certain point, we want that character to go from accepting what's happening to taking charge, showing that they have some agency in the situation. Where have stakes plateaued? Have you, for instance, pulled back too quickly? Have you shown a character who just accepted that their father lied and kind of went about their business and never did anything about it? Are you flattening scenes that have the potential to really escalate? Where is the low point disconnected from the character? In other words, are you relying on that tornado more than your character's experience of the tornado? And where is the internal shift not fully landed? Have you just given your character all kinds of great things to respond to and they haven't? Have we not seen enough internal change to believe that this story is going to resolve in a way that feels satisfying as a reader? I hope that this was helpful for you. If it was, please consider hitting subscribe. I drop videos like this every week on Tuesdays. And if you want to learn more about self-editing essentials, this is my group coaching program where we talk about things like this all the time. This is a group that is perfect for writers who have finished or almost finished writing their manuscripts and are ready to learn the art of self-editing. I'm going to stick a link in the chat. And if you want to learn more about this program, I would absolutely love to talk about it with you. So keep in touch and happy writing.